Okay, picture this. It's the mid-90s, right? Sony is staring down a desperate, absolutely make-or-break gamble to break into the brutal console wars. They've got this powerful new machine, sure, but they are totally missing the one critical weapon you literally had to have to fight Nintendo's Mario and Sega Sonic: a mascot. Enter Naughty Dog, a tiny, basically broke development studio. Against all odds, this totally underfunded team would somehow engineer a multi-million-dollar phenomenon that absolutely defined a generation, only to watch it suffer a completely tragic demise and then pull off one of the most miraculous rebirths in gaming history. Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this because it's wild. How exactly did an untested, completely underfunded duo just sitting in a California office hacking together code actually manage to challenge the king of platformers and create an absolute gaming legend? To bridge that massive curiosity gap, we've got to look at the unbelievable, almost insane lengths this team went to just to get their vision onto a screen. Which brings us to Act 1, Coding the Impossible. So, the year is 1994, and development at Naughty Dog is, well, it's absolute chaos. They flirted with a traditional 2D sci-fi game at first, but decided to risk literally everything on this new, crazy 3D trend. Finding the actual mascot was a wild process of trial and error. I mean, before landing on a crate-smashing Bandicoot, they almost went with a character named Willy the Wombat. Yeah, Willy the Wombat. They even threw in a girlfriend named Tana, who, keeping with that unhinged 90s edge, was directly inspired by Pamela Anderson. But now, what's really interesting about this is their hilarious top-secret working title, Sonic's Ass Game. Why? Well, because unlike Sonic or Mario, where you viewed them from the side, Naughty Dog built a revolutionary 3D camera that followed the character right from behind. You were literally staring at the back of the Bandicoot the entire time. It was totally untested, but man, it was the secret sauce that made those 3D environments feel so incredibly deep and immersive. But here's the thing. Building a 3D world on the original PlayStation hardware? An absolute nightmare. Let me break down this mind-blowing technical achievement for you. The PS1's limited memory could only handle pushing a maximum of about 900 polygons on screen at any given time. That's essentially nothing. So Naughty Dog literally hacked the console's operating system. They completely bypassed its standard memory limits just to squeeze Crash himself into 532 polygons. And to hide the system's graphic weaknesses, they brilliantly built the lush jungle environments without a single straight line, basically tricking our eyes into seeing these dense organic worlds. Real genius stuff. And that technical wizardry, it kicked off a totally intense, non-stop crunch period that birthed 3 iconic, multi-million-selling games in just 3 years. Talk about lightning in a bottle. Naughty Dog rapidly evolved their formula. The sequel, Cortex Strikes Back, brought in his smarter sister Coco and those massive dimensional warp rooms. Then Warped threw in time traveling, jet skis, motorcycles, airplanes, the whole shebang. Every single year, they pushed the literal extreme limits of what the console could do, and the world rewarded them with millions of copies sold. They definitely knew they had a massive hit on their hands, and Sony leaned super hard into that rebellious 90s attitude. You probably remember this. They famously ran a commercial with a guy in a giant Crash Bandicoot suit driving right up to Nintendo's actual corporate headquarters. He gets out with a bullhorn and just yells, "Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived." It was a bold, brilliant marketing stunt, and it absolutely cemented Crash as PlayStation's unofficial, totally rebellious mascot. So, Naughty Dog's final masterpiece with the character was basically a direct attack on Mario Kart, Crash Team Racing. But surprise, surprise, they hit the PlayStation's processing limit again, especially with that 4-player split-screen mode. Their brilliant solution? They cleverly faked it. They replaced the heavy 3D tires on the carts with dynamic 2D sprites that just rotated based on your camera angle. It saved incredible amounts of console memory, let them beat Mario Kart at its own game mechanically, and it sold a staggering 4 million copies. Everything seemed perfect. Naughty Dog was on top of the world, and Crash was the undisputed king of PlayStation. But there was a catch, a truly tragic twist that would entirely change the trajectory of gaming history. Naughty Dog, the incredibly passionate creators who poured their blood, sweat, and code into this franchise, didn't actually own the intellectual property. Universal Interactive did. And Naughty Dog's contract? It was officially up. This brings us to a much darker era. Act 2. Greed and Fall. Without the visionary creators at Naughty Dog there to protect him, the franchise entered an exhausting, completely dark era. We went straight from Naughty Dog's polished, deeply focused golden age to Universal's absolute chaotic scramble. Cold corporate greed and wildly rushed development cycles completely took over passionate creativity. Universal just started shopping the Bandicoot out to multiple different studios, basically looking for whoever could meet a super tight deadline. It became a messy, multi-developer free-for-all across different consoles, handhelds, and eventually mobile phones. The franchise was entirely losing its unique identity, desperately trying to copy whatever gaming trend was hot without understanding the core mechanics that made the original trilogy so incredibly special. This chaos resulted in a rapid-fire graveyard of total mediocrity. First, we got Crash Bash, which was just an uninspired Mario Party clone. Then came Wrath of Cortex, a game so horribly optimized you were forced to stare at agonizing 45-second loading screens just to play a single level. Insane. And it hit absolute rock bottom on the Nintendo DS with Crash Boom Bang, suffering an abysmal 2 out of 10 score from IGN for incredibly lazy, uninspired gameplay. And this brilliantly illustrates the desperate identity crisis the series was going through, culminating in 2007 with a bizarre soft reboot called Crash of the Titans. They completely scrapped the precise classic platforming for generic beat-em-up combat where you fought giant mutants. Even worse, they totally alienated longtime fans with these edgy punk character redesigns. I mean, they literally covered Crash in tribal tattoos. It strayed so far from its roots that it wasn't even released in Japan, which is super ironic considering Japan was the birthplace of the original game's massive Golden Sales Awards. To add insult to injury, the developers made another wildly confusing choice. After 11 years of Crash being this famously silent, highly expressive physical protagonist, they finally decided to let him speak. Any guesses on his canonical first spoken word after a decade of silence? Pancakes. Yep. After saving the world countless times, his big dramatic dialogue was just pancakes? Fans were, to put it mildly, incredibly underwhelmed. Then, disaster struck. Or, maybe the bleeding finally stopped, depending on how you look at it. After this continuous string of commercial and critical failures, the IP eventually landed in the hands of Activision. Looking at the mangled reputation of this once great PlayStation legend, they made a harsh but absolutely necessary call. They put the failing franchise completely on ice. Crash just vanished for nearly a decade. But the story doesn't end there. Welcome to Act 3, The Glorious Resurrection. So after nearly 10 years of total silence, a massive wave of internet nostalgia started to swell up. Fans desperately wanted their 90s hero back. And in 2017, the developers at Vicarious Visions actually answered. They released the Insane Trilogy, a gorgeous, ground-up, high-definition remake of those original 3 Naughty Dog classics, and it absolutely punched the gaming industry in the face, selling a mind-blowing 20 million copies. That's right, 20 million. It wasn't just a successful remaster, it was rock-solid proof of the immense psychological power of nostalgia. People didn't just casually want Crash, they passionately craved him. So the crucial point is that the developers didn't just rebuild the games, they deeply honored the hardcore legacy. As a huge nod to the fans, they released a level called Stormy Ascent. Now, back in 1996, Naughty Dog actually cut this level right before launch because it was deemed absurdly brutal for human sanity. They hid it deep in the original disc's code because it was literally too risky to delete without crashing the whole game. But for the remaster, they finally unleashed it, gleefully punishing veterans who thought they had completely mastered the classic mechanics. Let's move to 2020 and see how this builds, because developer Toys for Bob finally did the impossible. They created a brand new, critically acclaimed sequel, Crash 4, It's About Time. They totally succeeded in resurrecting the series by perfectly nailing that original Jackass meets Looney Tunes charm, while throwing in fresh, really challenging mechanics, like reality-bending quantum masks and this wild multiverse storyline. They even added a touch of edge with some swearing bandicoots, proving for sure that Crash could evolve without losing his soul. From an underfunded 532-polygon gamble, through a completely tragic corporate identity crisis, all the way to a 20 million selling nostalgia powerhouse, Crash has seriously had the wildest roller coaster history in the industry. But as he stands on the precipice of the future, looking past the remakes and the multiverse, we have to wonder, can a 90s mascot truly survive and innovate in the landscape of modern gaming? Well, if his history tells us absolutely anything, it's that you should never, ever count out a Bandicoot with an extra life.